I don't rock Chanel, I rock Channel. Hell no, this ain't a purse, it's a statue. Bless.
Let's Argue Episode 1. So in this series I'll be looking at different topics and questions and give my opinions on them. I'll release some of them as individual clips on my channel as well. And also, if you like MMA, the UFC and all things fitness, check out my friend's podcast, Life with Colin, where he talks about all these different subjects. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description below. So the first topic today is, do Manchester United need a director of football, and if so, who should they go for? So as there are different types of managers, there are different types of directors of football. Cheeky Begiristain, the Manchester City Director of Football, is a more high-end type of Director of Football, specialising in using powerful backing to build a title contending side around a certain philosophy. Someone like Michael Zorc at Dortmund specialises in bringing young talents in that can develop for around the £15 to £30 million mark. A Director of Football like Monchi at Sevilla operates slightly differently, not just focusing on bringing in young players, but players who can fit the side in the short term as well, but also develop and do not cost much more than 15 or 20 million. United need a director of football who can build a squad in a similar style to how Zorc has built Dortmund, which is with a long-term strategy over 3 to 5 years, bringing in players under the age of 26 who can develop. However, unlike Dortmund, Manchester United can attract and keep players of higher quality. I suggest someone like Zorc because this United squad needs a lot of surgery, so they're going to have to spend money smart to stay within both FFPs and the Glazers' own transfer restrictions. My three main candidates for the job would be Michael Zorc at Dortmund, Paul Mitchell at Leipzig and formerly of Southampton and Tottenham, and the Lille Director of Football, Luis Campos. Luis Campos would be my number one target, and this is because of his track record, as he was a man behind building the Monaco side who got to the Champions League semi-final, and also this Lille side which finished second last season. He's incredibly astute at finding players who can develop into world-class players, not just players who get to a decent level and then can be sold, which is the limitations of someone like Monchi, who does work well at Sevilla, but it's questionable whether he would work at a bigger club like Manchester United. Sevilla's transfer strategy is based off making profit off of player sales. However, this isn't or shouldn't be how Manchester United look to operate. They need players who are going to develop into those world-class players, who can fit into the squad and help them build a title contending side. Benjamin Mendy, Bernardo Silva and Fabinho are some of the players that have developed amazingly since being picked up by Campos, and this is what United should be pursuing. So on to the next topic, which is, was Clarence Seedorf underrated? To a degree, I think with some players in the past, people look back at them and overrate them, as they remember certain moments over the course of their whole career, and I think they subscribe this to an individual season. So if you were looking at someone like Kevin De Bruyne, for example, you're thinking about him this season and last season maybe, and you're remembering everything that's happened in between. You're not just going to look at him, something he did in 2016, something he did in 2018, something he did in 2019, and sort of mesh that together. Whereas I think people do this, certainly with players like Ryan Giggs and Steven Gerrard. People, for example, will look at Steven Gerrard and remember him in the 2004-2005 season, the 2006 season, the 2009 season, and then later on in his career as well. So I think that rather than judging a player over the course of his whole career, what I think people should be looking to do is look at different sections of their career, say 2 or 3 seasons, and compare players through that, because otherwise you could be looking at a player, a moment that happened when he was 20, a moment that happened when he was 24 and 28, and you're not looking at them consistently throughout a whole season. Whereas if you're looking at a current player, say Sadio Mane or Mo Salah, you're judging them over the course of the whole season. You're not just going to look at their best parts from 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. Whereas I think people do that with a lot of the retired players especially, which is down to looking back in hindsight with rose-tinted glasses a lot of the time. However, I don't think this applies to Seedorf, and I would go as far to say he's the opposite of this type of overrated player, you could say. Seedorf was incredibly consistent from his time at Ajax all the way to his time at Milan, playing a role on the pitch which wasn't as romanticised as say Steven Gerrard's role was, as Seedorf wasn't scoring screamers in cup finals, but he was playing a pivotal role in that system in finals as well, that kept the whole system together. For Louis van Gaal, he played the role of what you would call a carragher, which is a central midfielder who has a responsibility of playing as a fullback also without the ball, with Louis van Gaal's 3-6-1 diamond shape having 2 natural wingers instead of wing-backs. The wide central midfielders in the diamond, Edgar Davids and Seedorf, had the task of moving over to defend those wide channels, which not only requires an insane amount of physicality and stamina, but also positional awareness and in-game intelligence, which Seedorf had in abundance. He fulfilled similar workmanlike roles in Capello and Heinke's Real Madrid sides, where he won La Liga and the Champions League. At AC Milan, he was crucial in Ancelotti's Christmas tree 4-3-2-1 shape, as he and Gattuso were almost the steel beams keeping the system strong, allowing the more creative midfielders like Carragher and Pirlo to have a base from which they could play from, and taking a lot of the defensive burden off them. So I do think Seedorf is underrated when people look back, but I think this is because people like to romanticise goals and offensive actions rather than looking at the overall performance, which is what Seedorf gave throughout his career. So now on to the third topic: how useful are expected goals as a metric? So what are expected goals? Well, the expected goals metric measures the quality of a shot based on several variables such as assist type, shot angle and distance from goal, whether it was a headed shot or whether it was defined as a big chance. You can also use this for teams and individual players. For teams, it can be used to see how an individual game went, with a single metric which is far more reliable in seeing the actual performances of each side, rather than just looking at the score. For example, let's say Manchester United play Manchester City, and Manchester City completely dominate United. They create 3 really good one-on-one chances where you would usually expect them to score, but for whatever reason, poor finishing or extraordinary goalkeeping, they don't score them. Manchester United are completely carved open for all these chances and could easily have been 3 behind, but in the 70th minute Marcus Rashford cuts out a sloppy pass from one centre-back to the other, runs through on goal and scores the only goal of the game. Just by looking at the game, it's hard to see how well each side played, as United could have been the side which created the better chances but only scored 1, or City could have created the better chances and were wasteful and got punished for it. Expected goals gives us a metric for each side, showing how many goals you would expect each side to score from the chances that they created. This way we can analyse an individual game or team and see how good they actually are, cutting out individual moments of brilliance or mistakes, which then help us to potentially predict results in the future and judge how good a side actually is. Throughout a season, you can use expected goals to see just how good a side actually is, taking away a great proportion of fortune that may come with the results table ranked on actual points. Take Newcastle for example. They are currently 13th in the Premier League, which you may think means they are a solid mid-table club, and if they make a few signings they could be pushing for 9th or 10th next season. However, expected points, which obviously comes from expected goals each game, pulls the layer away from the results table, allowing us to actually see that Newcastle have actually been extremely fortunate and have been the worst side from expected points in the league and need to improve dramatically next season. For individual players, I also find it incredibly useful as a statistic as well, mainly for strikers. This is because first we can see which players are good at finding chances, and secondly who is good at finishing them. For example, if we take Jamie Vardy for example, we can see that he's firstly getting into a lot of goal scoring positions as seen with his high XG rate, and that he's an excellent finisher off these chances as he's overperformed his XG rate by a massive 4.76 goals this season. You can also use non-penalty expected goals as well if you want to take penalties out of this metric, which is what I do most of the time. If a player is overperforming his XG rate, this implies that a player is a good finisher, because he's scoring more goals than he is statistically expected to from the chances that he's getting. Cristiano Ronaldo was a great example of a player who had phenomenal movement, and whilst also being an outstanding finisher, it was his ability to find and create chances for himself that made him so good. As you can see from around 2014-2015, he was recording an insane XG rate, and sometimes not even overperforming it, but he was getting so many chances that he was scoring 35-40 goals in the league those seasons. So that's why I think expected goals is a great metric to use both for individual players and for teams. So the next topic is, should Arsenal sell Aubameyang this summer? So Arsenal are facing 2 major problems with the Aubameyang situation, which are both pushing against them, making the situation a lose-lose for them. Aubameyang is 31 very soon and he's out of contract next summer, which means that he'll be able to leave on a free. So to avoid this from happening, Arsenal can either sell him this summer and reinvest the transfer fee they get for him in a replacement, or they can give him a new contract, which isn't if, as it isn't clear whether Aubameyang would want to stay at Arsenal. Then not only would you probably have to give him a pay rise, but you'd also have to sign him to a long-term contract, probably 4 years, which is what I guess Aubameyang would demand, as why would he accept a 2 or 3 year deal when this would scupper his chances of a big move, and also mean that at 33 or 34 he's now off this big wage and in likely decline, and would therefore have to accept this money at another club. For this reason, I believe any contract he would sign would likely be 4 years, meaning that Aubameyang's contract would expire when he's 35. Now this would be the obvious option if Aubameyang was say 27, as a 4-year contract there isn't much risk as he's unlikely to decline significantly in this period. However, most strikers begin to decline around 32 or 33, so this situation would see Arsenal have a decline in Aubameyang on their books for maybe 2 declining years whilst on big money. This suggests to me that the way Arsenal's finances are, which seems to be moving towards a more financially manageable strategy, this isn't going to be an option. However, the big misconception about the first option, selling Aubameyang this summer, is that Arsenal would be able to sell him for £60 million plus, which just isn't possible because of his age at 31 and because of his contract situation. Why would a club pay £60 million when they could get him for nothing next summer? The best Arsenal could get for him would be around £40 million at the max, but more likely around the £30 million mark. So they would have to weigh up whether gaining £30 million this summer and losing Aubameyang is a deal worth taking. I wouldn't sell Aubameyang this summer if I was Arsenal because I feel that they need to improve other areas of the squad as well, such as at centre-back and central defensive midfield, and I think that it could be better to keep Aubameyang, their biggest contributor to their offensive output, whilst they transition through a development period next season, when they let him go and look to replace him, when they already have the signings from this summer integrated into the side. In terms of potential replacements, Marlon at PSV and Miller Rashica are the 2 players I would be keeping tabs on if I was Arsenal, as both are capable of playing the roles of inside or wide forwards from either flank in a 4-3-3, and are 2 wide attackers who have excellent goal scoring metrics in terms of their XG rates and goals per 90 minutes. So the next topic is, how long will it take for Newcastle to get into the Champions League if their Saudi Arabian billionaire takeover is complete? Well, a lot of people were seemingly suggesting that Newcastle will be able to spend £250 million plus each summer and will have a similar rise up the Premier League to Manchester City's, which saw them get into the Champions League places within the first 2 full seasons of Sheikh Mansour owning the club. Now, Newcastle aren't going to be following the same road as Manchester City because FFP is going to stop them spending more than £150 million, certainly in the next transfer window. This Newcastle squad also needs a lot of surgery, which means they're going to have to bring in 6 or 7 players just to compete with the likes of Wolves or Everton next season, meaning they aren't going to be able to spend £50 million on one star player, as this will take up a significant proportion of their budget. Also, another thing to consider is that just because they have money to spend doesn't mean they will be spending it efficiently. City got fortunate in a way, as at that time they were able to bring in players that would usually be going to top 4 sides, which was seen with Yaya Toure and David Silva, so didn't need such an efficient spending plan of how they were going to integrate players into the club's system in order to force their way into the top 4. Newcastle aren't yet ready to compete with Manchester United and Chelsea for players and are instead going to be operating in the same market as the likes of Arsenal, Wolves and Everton. Also, if you look at who they're being linked with, which can give you an indication of where the new owners' thoughts are, it is with players like Arturo Vidal, James Rodriguez and Edison Cavani, suggesting that Newcastle want to make moves similar to those that were made at PSG when their takeover occurred, which happened with players like Ibrahimovic and Lavezzi arriving. This spells disaster to me, as buying these ageing players on the decline is just going to mean that Newcastle need to go back into the market in 2 or 3 seasons to replace these players, instead of doing what they should be doing, which is signing players who are 27 and under, who can all develop at the same time, and Newcastle can continue improving the squad over the next few transfer windows as these players develop. However, it doesn't seem that they are going to pursue this strategy in the immediate anyway, which is why I'm going to predict that Newcastle don't finish in the top 4 for the next 3 seasons after this one at least. Thank you for watching. If you like that video, remember to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and check out the podcast linked in the description below.
Okay, now what about your lyrics?
What about them?
What are you saying in your lyrics?
Nothing. Shit to piss old white people off like you.
Is that right?
My lyrics aren't I don't know. I'm sorry if I keep talking. My lyrics aren't offensive.
Aren't they?
No.
Some people find them offensive, don't they? You've
Yeah,
heard that
some
before.
people find everything offensive.